Hello and welcome to the session on the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police Officers' new accreditation to the Arizona Police Departments. If that's not what you want to hear, you're in the wrong room. I'm Gail Barney, Mayor of the town of Queen Creek and a member of the League Executive Committee, and it's my pleasure to sit up here and listen to these fine gentlemen explain that topic to us. As a reminder, all the handouts and speakers' bios from all of the sessions are available on the League's website and on the conference mobile app. Also a reminder to please silence your phones or turn them off completely. The purpose of this session is to introduce the new Arizona Law Enforcement Accreditation Program that will be available on September 1st. This program will allow law enforcement agencies an affordable and state-specific program to become accredited. And our speakers today are Robert DeVeers, Chief of the Police of the City of Kingman, and Kevin Ray, ALEAP Program Manager for the Arizona Association of Chief of Police. So without no further ado, gentlemen, I don't know what order you want to speak, so I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate the chance to come in and talk to you about a program that we are very excited, we being the chiefs across the state, from a law enforcement standard aspect. This is something that we've been discussing for upwards of a decade, and it was a very cumbersome project, a very financially difficult for a lot of agencies to pursue the concept of accreditation. So accreditation itself is nothing new to law enforcement. However, a state accreditation program is brand new to Arizona. And what I want to do today is kind of give you a little bit of explanation as to what the accreditation concept is, how we got here, and Kevin will walk you through the actual process that hopefully your agencies from your communities will be pursuing. Our ultimate goals with the accreditation is to primarily, the number one, is to develop and have professional law enforcement best practices available to the agencies here within our state. And it's also to increase our efficiency and effectiveness as law enforcement agencies. So this is really a good checks and balance for us as we move forward. And a big one that hopefully all of you would be very interested in, it also affords the opportunity to reduce liability for your law enforcement agencies as well as for your community. Accreditation will not necessarily reduce lawsuits that are filed, but what you see nationally, a trend is that it actually will reduce the amount of the claim, because hopefully your agency has not only adopted best practices, but they're following best practices. So what is accreditation? It's a systematic method, as I said, to go through the full internal operations of your police department, or police department, town marshal, whichever it may be, and to take a look at all different aspects of that from the inside to the outside. More so, it's a voluntary program. This is something that your agencies are going to want to or will have to desire to pursue, because it is going to be cumbersome in some aspects as you move forward. Not nearly as cumbersome if you were to follow a national accreditation program, which we'll discuss here in just a moment. The history of law enforcement accreditation dates back many, many years. And that's why I say this isn't necessarily a new concept. Where accreditation came from is a compilation of ideas that formulated from a lot of the professional law enforcement associations across the country. The International Associations of Chief of Police, very involved with it. NOBLE is your National Association of Black Law Enforcement. PERF is your professional, your larger size agencies as well. All of them collaborated together to develop what is known as CALEA. And CALEA has been in effect for many years. However, from our standpoint, if you look at Arizona as a state, there are 12 agencies out of all of the communities in our state that are CALEA accredited. You might ask yourself, well, why is that? And it comes down to, number one is cost. It is extremely costly. And number two, it is extremely staff intensive. From our standpoint, looking at it from the size of Kingman, I would have to have one person, one full-time person dedicated to a CALIA program. We don't have that luxury to be able to do it. So many agencies, mid-sized agencies, smaller agencies, the concept of achieving CALIA has been distant for all of us. So what you have seen over the course of the last several years is a transition, and that's called the state law enforcement accreditation programs, Accreditation. Arizona, when we started down this path, we became the 29th state in the country to pursue and develop our own state accreditation program. ACOP, which is the Chiefs Association, had looked at this several times, and we actually had assigned, and here's where we made a mistake, we assigned a person to pursue and to look into possibly achieving accreditation for Arizona. That's where we went wrong, because that person came back to us, rightfully so, and said, there's no way we can do this with the staff and with the costs that would be related to it. So with that, we had really unfortunately set ourselves up to fail, because we only had one individual trying to take on this massive project of which you're going to learn about. So ALEAP, under President Terry Rosema from Marana PD, he developed a working group. That working group was formed in January 2017, and it was a really diverse, select group. We had large departments, we had small departments, we had mid-sized departments, we had tribal, we had university involved, we had Arizona Post involved, and we really had a truly dedicated group that took on this task of trying to bring accreditation to the state of Arizona. Those standards we worked through, and working through the other state accreditation programs, what we found is they were more than willing to share. They basically opened up their books and said, here, cut and paste, do what you want to do. So this working group over the course of that year met monthly, and these were very lengthy meetings, some very healthy dialogue. This was no just rubber stamp, this is good. We're going to take Oregon's policy right here, and we're going to just plug in Arizona, and that's going to be good enough for us. Now, we had some real healthy dialogue and discussion as this moved forward. And through the course of that, we developed our standards, 174 standards. CALIA is 450?
464.
So you can imagine we're about a quarter of what the national accreditation is. We're on the high end of the state accreditation programs. The state accreditation programs typically are in the 150 range. We're 174, and there's a reason for that that stands us out here, and we'll talk about it. The working group went through, and one of the things we did is we were fortunate enough to have a tribal member at the table with us. When I met with the Accreditation people in May of 2017 in Santa Fe, they were astounded that we actually had a tribal department involved with us and that they were actually at the table. We, being ALEAP, which is our accreditation program, have a specific section in our standards that deals in working with Indian country. And we are the only state program that has that opportunity, and we're also a standalone from CALIA. The National Accreditation Program doesn't even address working with Indian countries. So we are the first in the nation to undertake this and to actually have the tribal departments and members working hand in hand with us. So we are really proud of that opportunity. The next big thing as we developed our program, which we brought to our Chiefs Executive Board and they adopted, was, okay, we now have a program, how are we going to fund it? And we were very fortunate. We made a presentation last November to the Arizona Risk Pool and laid out what our idea was, what our timeline was, and what we felt would be appropriate. And the day after our presentation, we got the phone call and said, we are going to fund your program. So we are extremely thankful. So within a one-year time period, we went from having a concept and a discussion to we now have a program, we now have funding. What's our next step? We've got to get a manager. And this was probably I can say the only delay that we encountered, because we went out and pursued an accreditation manager, a program manager for our program. And in the first wave of applications, as we were finishing everything up, we kind of sat there and went, huh, okay. None of us had that really great feeling that this is the person that we needed. So we consciously made the decision and said, this program is too critical, too important to the state of Arizona to just accept what we have right now. We felt we could do better. So we did. We went back out on a national search, and that was the best decision that we've made, because through that we located Mr. Kevin Ray. And as luck would have it, Kevin was in the process of retiring from Novi PD in Michigan. He already had his retirement date, and he had a July 1st move date to the city of Surprise, where he had purchased a home. Kevin also ran the CALIA program for Novi, and under his direction, Novi became the first Michigan accredited program. And what I mean by that is, in January 2017, when we were pursuing our goal and dream, Michigan was just launching their program. So under Kevin's leadership, Novi achieved the first dual accreditation in the state of Michigan. And I can tell you, he's hit the ground running for us, and great things have been happening. We're really, really pleased. So our next step is why we are here. We wanted to be able to come to the league and say, here's what we have to offer, and we believe it will be of benefit to your agencies and to your communities. September 1st is going to be our launch for getting the programs up and running. So this is the opportunity to get on board and hopefully pursue and achieve accreditation, because we believe we can have our first departments certified and able to be accredited by January 2020 is our goal. So what is Kevin's job? First and foremost, get them accredited. And with that, we as the Chiefs Association, as ALEAP, we are not telling the departments what to do or how to do it. We are giving them templates as to what are best practices. It's up to them as to how to implement and what is actually going to work best within their communities. Kevin's there to provide guidance to them and help walk them through. He'll obviously be accepting the applications. Next month, on September 11th, the commission will be meeting and we'll be formally accepting our first agencies to come in. And we already have, even before the start of the program and the kickoff, we have a half dozen agencies that are on board and ready to move, one of those including a tribal agency. So that to me is really exciting, because we're going to be the first in the nation to be able to achieve something to that effect. His other job is going to be to train assessors. That was one of the things we also looked at from ACOP, because we are not, a lot of the communities they're not deep pocket communities. So how are we going to be able to achieve this and keep it as cost effective as we can for the agencies? You'll see the fee structure here as we move through the program, which is very reasonable in comparison to trying to pursue CALIA. So what we've decided, we being the Chiefs Association, is that the agency that is applying for accreditation is going to be responsible for lodging and per diem of our assessors that will go out and will do the inspections of the department to ensure they're right up to speed. The agency, our agencies, are going to be providing those assessors at no cost to that agency. We will carry that cost. So what is the advantage going, well, how is that going to benefit us if we're sending our staff over to inspect Winslow? How is that going to benefit me? I see a huge benefit. My desire is to have at least 2 of our staff trained as assessors from the sergeant lieutenant level. I can't think of a better, cost-effective succession planning training that you could get. They're going to be going out across the state and have the opportunity to look at other agencies, internal, external operations, and come back with their own. I can't see where that is anything but positive for us as law enforcement to build our future leaders that are getting exposed to best practices across the state. Then the next thing is going to be assign and train accreditation managers. These are the people from your agencies that are going to work hand in hand with Kevin to get that agency from 0 to accreditation. And I'm going to throw him under the bus here, but our newly promoted Deputy Chief, Evan Coonard, is here. Evan is our assigned program manager, and he'll be going through the training next week. We are providing those trainings. Kevin's going to be on the road next week, going across the state, north, south, and central, all over, and providing no-cost accreditation manager training. So we want to get these people up to speed, get them on the ground, and get them moving. So then his last task is going to be the oversight of all of the activities. General process, Kevin's going to actually walk you through what the different phases of the actual accreditation are in just a few minutes. But essentially what you're going to be doing is it's not just policies and procedures, it's training, but then it's also beyond the policy, it's practice. Are you really doing what you say you're doing? You're talking the talk, are you walking the walk? And that's a big part of it, because when we go out and start those inspections, September of 2019, those agencies are going to have to show that, in effect, over this course of this past year, they have been doing exactly what they say they're doing in those standards. So why would you want to do it? Why would you want to pursue accreditation? Number one, it's a huge achievement for agencies to be able to do. But first and foremost, it's given you sound written policies to be able to follow. Not just sound policies, but best practice policies that have been taken from across the United States. So the other part of that is, and we've talked about this before, is we can get our policy and procedure manual done and go, fantastic. We've accomplished it. We're done. Our job here is finished. But the problem is, as we were talking before the session, 2 months from now, there's going to be something that may need to be changed in there. 3 months from now, there's going to be other changes. We go through legal reviews every year and get updates, but we may not necessarily translate it and move it into the policies and procedures. ALEAP is going to require that. So we can't go, Kingman cannot go, okay, we're accredited, we've got 4 years, we can sit back on our laurels and just wait, and then we're going to have to work like the Dickens again. There's actually, and part of it is the renewal costs, and that's because each year, 25% of your policies will go under review to make sure you are walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So that is a big part of the accreditation, is it's continual. It's a fluid movement. And I can tell you this, as a matter of fact, already, those 175 standards that we've adopted, there's suggestion for some revisions on 4 already. So it's going to be a continual fluid document that we're going to be working through all the time as we move forward. What we did is with our Chiefs Association, we have our executive board. They oversee, that's Kevin's boss. They are the ones that oversee all of the operations. However, we created a commission, and that commission is the one that's going to take a look at, they're going to accept the agency's applications to become involved with the program. They're the ones that are going to be making the decision based upon Kevin's recommendation to say, yes, Winslow has achieved this, they are going to be accredited, and they'll go through the formal adoption of that accreditation. So with that commission, we looked at all of them across the country and said, what do we want? And we saw some real variations, but the one thing that we, being the Chiefs Association, one of the ones we saw we really didn't like, and that was a 7-member commission that was all law enforcement. We're going, I don't think that's in our best interest. We really want to get the buy-in from the state that this isn't just law enforcement dictating what's best practice. We have more involvement. So we actually have some members that are law enforcement that are on board. We also have Arizona Post, which is the state sanctioning body for all law enforcement. The risk pool, obviously they're a strong partner of ours, and they're involved. We have the League of Cities and Towns involved, and we also selected an elected official. With that, for the agencies that are being accredited, like I said, I got ahead of myself a little bit, all of that accreditation will go before this commission. So who is this commission? This is the current commission. They're appointed for 3 years, and they will be on that commission for a course of 3 years. I have the distinct honor at this point of serving as the chair for the new commission. Chief Dan Brown from Winslow is the vice chair. And both of us were part of the working group, and this is, as some have said, it's our baby, and we want to see it through to its original first steps as it grows up. And from there, we also have Chief Joe Brugman, who is our current president of ACOP, Mr. Mark Perkovich from Arizona Post, Mr. Jim Jellison, who is an attorney with Southwest Risk, Mr. Strobeck from the League, and then our elected official. There was a method to our madness, as I was telling some before this session. We selected a sheriff. And some will go, well, that's law enforcement. Yes, it is. But it's also an elected official. Our goal is, this program right now is intended for municipal agencies. We hope to see this program blossom and get the sheriff's departments involved, communication centers involved, detention centers involved. We're at the beginning steps of what we see and can envision a much larger detailed program.
Hey, Bob,
Yes.
was there ever any discussion about including the city manager on the commission? Since most police chiefs report to the city manager.
We have not, but that is a great idea, and it's something that we can bring forward, because right now we're at a 7-member. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't add to that board, but I think that would be an excellent representative to be in there as well. Yes.
Was there any thought given to appointing people from the universities that teach criminal justice or anything like that?
Yes, there was. That was one of them. We actually looked at a broad base, and we could actually see our commission expand to 9 because universities was one of them that we discussed. And so those are potentials, and maybe we'll have some jobs coming up for you here in the very near future. But the final goals here is just to talk again, is the award of excellence, formalizing management procedures, and fair, non-discriminatory practices. And overall, I think, not just from the administration, but staff themselves, the buy-in and the understanding, the confidence that that agency that they are working for is following best practices from across the country. And the benefits, again, just finally, as Kevin will move in here, it's that final stamp of approval, hopefully decreasing your litigation. It gives us, and one of the biggest things is that self-assessment, continual self-assessment, where instead of, like I said in the past, you wrap up your policies and procedures, you put it on the shelf, and you forget to go back and keep it up to date. This really drives that need and requirement for you to be able to do so. And it gives you enhanced knowledge in regards to all of your staff as to best practices and the legal definitions as to those involved. And hopefully, by achieving an accreditation status, it will instill some public confidence in your community as to their agency. It's going to take a push in some aspects, but it has to have buy-in from the CEOs. And I can tell you, we've been across the state. We've been talking about this for a long time. Every meeting that we have from the Chiefs Association, we're giving updates as to where we are. And we did a straw poll. And I can tell you, if I can back up for just a second, nationally, participation in the state programs runs about 25% of the agencies within that state actually participate in the state accreditation program. We did a straw poll at one of our conferences and asked how many agencies would actually like to get involved and pursue this. And I'm proud to say that we had probably 80% of those that were in that room raise their hand and said this is something that we want to do. We not only stand the chance of being the first that has tribal, we now stand, and I believe, a very good chance of being the state in the country with the largest participation in an accreditation process. So that is our ultimate goal, and as we pursue watching our baby begin to move forward and start to take its first steps. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our program manager, Kevin, to discuss, and then we'll take time for questions at the end as well. But however, if something pops in mind as we're going forward, please let us know. Be happy to answer. Kevin?
Thank you, Chief. I would like to thank Chief DeVries for the comments that he made regarding bringing me on board with this process. Having just moved here from the Motor City, getting into town on July 2nd, as the chief said, hitting the ground running, because I realized that it doesn't hurt your feet as bad if you keep running as opposed to stand still on the hot pavement. So it's been a little warmer here than it is in Metro Detroit, but I am absolutely pleased to be here and kind of walk everyone through the actual steps in the process of getting your agencies accredited. So there are actually 5 steps in the accreditation process, and the first is simply the application process. There is an application that's online on the ACOP website, azchiefsofpolice.org. go to the members section, and there's an entire section devoted to the accreditation program. Once the chief signs that application and submits that and some supporting material, then the application is taken to the commission, and the commission will formally introduce that agency into the process. At the time that the agency makes application, there is a fee. It is dependent upon the sworn employees that you have, not your total employees, but just your sworn staff. So Tier 1 to 25, is a $250 application fee and $125 annual renewal. Tier 2 and Tier 3, you see those fees respectively. This does not include any annual fees for any web-based document management systems like Power DMS or Lexipol or PMAM or whatever program your agency is either currently using or chooses to use. The actual expenses for the on-site assessment team will be paid by the agency on an actual cost basis. The only thing that the agency is going to be paying for is lodging and per diem for the 2 assessors. So, once the application has been accepted by the commission, the agency will move into what's called the self-assessment phase. The self-assessment phase for the initial accreditation could last as long as 24 months. Agencies have 24 months in which to receive their initial accreditation, which consists of making sure that their policies comply with the standards that the commission has approved. So in that self-assessment phase, it's an opportunity for agencies to not only make sure, number one, identify in their policies where they meet our standards, and if they do not have standards, if they do not have policies that meet our standards, they can create and develop those. Along with the policy development, they also need to demonstrate compliance with the standards, just like the chief said. They are talking the talk with the standards. Are they walking the walk? Well, we're going to find out. So each one of the standards not only requires that the agency show the assessors where in their policy they meet the standard, but also they need to show proofs of that compliance. Proofs of compliance could be anything as, it could be a police report, it could be a newspaper article, it could be a video clip, it could be a picture, it could be something that the assessors observe while they're on scene. So proofs of compliance, proof that you're complying with your agency policy is what the assessors are going to be looking for. Any new policies that are put into place, we want them fully implemented at least 3 months before the on-site assessment, because in that 3 months or that 90-day period, they should be able to come up with some type of proofs of compliance. What we don't want to do is we don't want to wait until a week before the assessors get on site for an agency to publish a brand new policy and they haven't been able to show that they can comply with that policy. Moving on, the agency can, if they choose, do a mock assessment. We'll use accreditation managers from other agencies to look through that agency's files to make sure that there aren't any red flags that are going to pop up when the assessors get on site. This is a completely voluntary step, but ultimately it's the accreditation manager's responsibility when that accreditation manager tells me that that agency is ready for their on-site assessment, that they're ready for their on-site assessment. The important thing that we want to make sure is when our assessors get on site, that that agency has a successful on-site accreditation. We want to make sure that they are successful. So once agencies can do these mock assessments if they choose, they are ready to move on to the next phase, which is the on-site assessment. The on-site assessment is going to consist of 2 assessors, take 2 days to complete. So probably the afternoon of one day, the assessors will stay overnight in your community and then finish up the next day. All of the assessors are going to be trained by themselves, and we'll talk about who's going to make up those assessors a little bit later. But just a sample schedule, day one, the assessors will review the files, make sure that the agencies are meeting the ALEAP standards that the ACOP board has approved. Agency tour, ride along with officers, interviews not only with officers but also community members, business owners, just basically trying to get the feel of that community and the support within that community for your police department. On day two, there'll be a public call-in session where assessors will take calls from the public about your agency and finish up file reviews, interviews, ride-alongs. And then at the end of the day, they're going to have what's called an exit interview with the chief of police and the accreditation manager. Basically an overview of what they observed while they were on scene, any recommendations they can make for changes in the future, and also what the assessor's recommendation to the commission is going to be on their accreditation status. Agencies will know or have a pretty good feeling once that exit interview is over whether or not they are going to get that accreditation award. So once the assessors leave, they complete a written report. That written report is forwarded to the commission members. At one of the ACOP conferences, there will be a hearing where the agency will come before the commission and answer any questions that the commission members might have. And then the commission members will vote whether or not to recommend that agency to the ACOP board for accreditation. And then finally, the award. We just talked about that. The candidate agency will come before the commission. The commission will then make a recommendation to the ACOP executive board, and that accreditation will be awarded. That award is for 4 years. And then either the ACOP board, the ALEAP commission, or myself will do a formal presentation in that community at a council meeting to congratulate them for the achievement that they had received. And then finally, maintaining compliance and reaccreditation. Again, this is a 4-year accreditation, so to receive the initial accreditation, you need to get it done within 24 months unless you get a waiver asking me for additional time. Once you receive that initial accreditation, that award is good for 4 years. However, just like the chief said earlier, that doesn't mean that for 4 years you can basically set your policy manual on the shelf. You still need to keep collecting proofs of compliance every year so that when we send assessors back out 4 years from now, you can show me the proofs of compliance for 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Okay. Not only that, but 25% of all of the standards for accredited agencies will be reviewed by myself annually, just to make sure that that they are keeping up on things, make sure that they are resolving any non-compliance issues, making sure that they understand that at each one of our commission meetings, standards may change just a little bit. So are they keeping up with the changes in the standards? So now the standards for accreditation, just like the chief said earlier, there are 174 standards. All of those standards are mandatory unless they are waived. And an example of that would be if we have a standard that has to do with reserve officers and their training. If your community does not employ reserve officers, then that standard will be not applicable, and there'll be 173 standards that you need to comply with. So all of the standards are mandatory unless waived by the program manager. This is a comparative program with the national program, which means that for those of you that come from agencies that do have that national accreditation, we do take that into account. We don't want to add additional work to your accreditation managers because having been an accreditation manager for several years, I really think that it's important that we try to keep the workload down as much as possible. CALIA does have over 464 standards for their advanced accreditation, and to add another 174 on top of that, especially when some of them are going to be duplicative just by the nature of the business that we're in, we are going to run that comparative program to make sure that we assist those CALIA agencies with this state process. As the chief said earlier, the standards are the best practices as set forth by the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police. We identify what we believe are the best practices for the efficient delivery of law enforcement services in the state of Arizona. What we do not do is we do not tell the chiefs how to do their job. Okay? We advise them as what we think the best practices are. How they meet those standards are up to them. We are making sure that for those communities that meet those best practices, that there is still that local control by the agency CEO to direct their workforce and make sure that that things are done in a manner that their community expects. One of the things that we had considered doing, and we are still considering doing, is creating some type of model or sample policy library for agencies to access if they don't have a policy on a specific topic. However, an agency like Kingman does, they can go to this sample or model policy library and see how they do it in Kingman. That comes with a caveat that we recommend that you not just take the name Kingman off of that policy and put the name Surprise on that policy, because the community expectations are going to be different in Kingman than they are in Surprise. So although there are sample policies out there, we really want you to modify those to best fit the needs of your community. Finally, who are the assessors going to be? The assessors are all going to be either active or retired police command officers from agencies throughout Arizona. They'll be required to complete assessor training by myself. And they're also going to be from outside of the area of the candidate agency. I do not want to get into a situation where we have a community that is being accredited and their on-site assessor is a commander from a neighboring community. If they are critical at all of that agency, it can create problems between those agencies, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So, you may see Chief Brugman from Safford. When his agency goes through the process, I'm going to be using assessors from Bullhead City. So we want to create as much separation as possible. So finally, in conclusion, we just want to reiterate the fact that we are here, the purpose of ACOP, the purpose of ALEAP, the purpose of myself, is that we are dedicated to the success of your departments, your police departments, your town marshals. We are dedicated to their success. We want to get them through this process as much as possible, or as quickly as possible, and as efficiently as possible, and shoot for that mark, like Chief DeVries said, of 80% of the agencies in the state of Arizona receiving this accreditation. So, with that, are there any questions?
Comment?
Okay.
When you have your assessors or your visitation team that go into the agency, will that visiting team issue a final exit report that is made public to the mayor and council?
Yeah, so once the assessment team leaves your community, they will have about 2 weeks to get their final written report in. That written report will be sent to the chief of police, and the chief of police is free to share that with whomever.
Are you still going to consider as part of the visitation team not not just active or retired police command, but people in criminal justice that are involved in the educational field? Or is it just seems that the people who are assessors are command people, so you're limiting the scope of people who can go in.
Sure.
Are you going to want to increase that to other people?
Yeah, so we have started out this last couple of weeks working on our accreditation manager training, because we understand that at the very earliest, an agency, if they start on September 11th at our next meeting, the earliest they could get done is probably 12 months. So we have not started accepting applications for assessors yet. So that is something that I'll take to the commission at our meeting on September 11th and see if we want to expand that pool of assessors. So right now, we do not have any assessors that are trained, because it didn't make any sense to me to train them now and then have them sit on the shelf for a year, and then next year in September go out and assess an agency. So we're going to be doing that assessor training in the spring. That I appreciate that comment and that question, and that's something that I'll definitely take to the commission on September 11th.
Kevin, and if I,
Application is due, I understood that it starts September the 1st, but how long is the application? You're accepting after 30 days, 60 days?
Yeah, so we have already really kind of unofficially started accepting applications, and we do have 5 agencies that have already turned in their applications, and those communities are Kingman, Winslow, Salt River, Lake Havasu, and St. John's. I do anticipate having 4 or 5 more before our commission meeting on September 11th. We're going to be accepting applications on a continual basis because not everybody has to be on the same cycle. As a matter of fact, it's probably easier for me and my assessment team if everyone is not on the same cycle. So we're going to be continually accepting applications. It's just the review of the very first applications will be on September 11th at our next commission meeting. But we'll be accepting those on a regular, continuing basis.
Kevin, if I can, in regards to your question as to universities or somebody else participating and being part of the assessor, having taught at the university level, it would take the right type of individual, because at the university level, they're talking globally, philosophy. They're not necessarily very familiar or familiar at all with internal workings of law enforcement agencies. So you do need to have some experience and exposure to that, but not saying that that would not necessarily benefit us, and we would have to take a look at the individual and what they bring to the table.
You know, one of the things that really kind of separates this state process from the national program is the fact that you'll find that quite a few of the standards are Arizona specific. CALEA, the national program, they have a large body of standards, over 460, but it's a national program. Not only is it a national program, it's an international program. CALEA is operated in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Barbados. So, you know, what we pride ourselves on is the fact that quite a few of our standards are Arizona specific, because what necessarily works in Montreal, Canada is not going to work in Mesa, Arizona. So, yes.
Based on your experience, I know our agency is using Lexapol to keep consistent with current policies, kind of the state of the profession. Does that lend itself to this program?
It does, in the fact that Lexapol does a very good job at writing policy. They do a very good job of writing policies related to the standards that agency is receiving accreditation for. We are going to be sharing our standards manual with Lexapol because there are a half a dozen agencies in the state of Arizona that use Lexapol. But what they do, they're very good at writing policy. They're not very good on the document management side when it comes to having an assessment, being able to upload proofs of compliance, things like that. So we are going to work with Lexipol, but there are other systems out there as well. From my experience in the city of Novi, I wrote my own policy. I didn't use Lexipol. I utilized a system from the International Association of Chiefs of Police called IACP.net. I would pull off model or sample policies from across the country, and I would take a paragraph from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'd take a paragraph from Waco, Texas, and I'd take a paragraph from Gilbert, Arizona, and I'd mash them all together and run it by my attorneys, and that would be the policy for my agency. So I was in charge of writing the policy for my agency, but programs such as Lexipol do a good job of helping communities create that base of policies.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for doing this. So beyond policies, will any of the ALEAP standards or best practices include training for officers? Yes?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have an entire chapter that's dedicated just to training, not only field training, but also in-service training. Not only in the chapter regarding training, but also in some of our other chapters, there is a training component to each one, whether it be in the use of force, whether it be in the use of force section, and we talk about, officers' qualifications or use of training on less than lethal weapons and things like that. So there are training sections in probably 30% of the standards, but there's an entire chapter that's dedicated solely to training.
It also will, I'm sorry.
I'm so happy to hear this, especially in light of the incident that occurred, as Chief DeVries knows, in Lake Havasu City recently, where a 56-year-old individual was shot down by the Lake Havasu City Police Department. He wasn't cooperative, he was intoxicated, and I think it was more or less a situation of suicide by cop based on the body cam video. I knew this man for 34 years. I don't know what brought him to this state of mind that he was in, but certainly you now have 3 officers who will be forever traumatized from having killed one of their own, because this gentleman was a lifetime firefighter, a lifetime proponent of law enforcement, huge supporter of law enforcement, and and he didn't show his hands. They weren't able to talk him down. They did a fabulous job, I thought, of trying to talk him down, and I'm so glad that use of less than lethal force, as you put it, will be included in that, because it seemed like a real teachable moment to me for going forward, that you had 3 guys there, right? And one of them could have deployed the taser on him. He was 15 feet away when he was shot. The other 2 could have taken care of whatever came next if that became necessary. So thank you again for doing that.
Thank you.
The other components that are also included in the standard will also address certain aspects of the facility in regards to things that should be meeting the standards. And a big one, and this was a center of long discussion, was hiring. And we've actually, the standards that ALEAP has adopted are a step, we've raised the bar for Arizona Post. Arizona Post was part of our discussion, but for them to change the rules as it relates to peace officers, it's about a 1.5 to 2 year process to get rules changed. So we're kind of setting the tone as to where we, as chiefs, believe that we need to move. So we've raised the bar on many of these things for what we feel is needed in our standards.
And I do just want to point out one other thing before we move to another question is, I don't want to leave the impression that accreditation is a panacea for everything that possibly could go wrong in your community, because it isn't. We recognize the fact that bad things are going to happen. But what we want to make sure is that your agency has the policies and procedures in place, so when something bad happens, we can mitigate the amount of damage that's done to the community and start that recovery process sooner.
Thank you. Does chief turnover have an effect on a possibility for an agency to become or stay accredited?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Chief turnover, does that affect the turnover of the chief of police for an agency? Does that affect the possibility for that agency to become or stay accredited?
No, no, it should not. If the chief moves on, that's where your accreditation manager is your key component there. And if you see movement within the state, hopefully it's going to be just a fluid movement because they would already be familiar with what's going on with ALEAP.
And it's not going to, our assessors are not going out there to assess the police chief. Our assessors are going out there to assess the agency.
Yes.
So, you know, one thing that I've learned over my 25 years in law enforcement, and some have many more years than me, is the day after I retired from the city of Novi, there was somebody sitting in my seat. So it's important to remember that we're assessing the agency, not the individuals within the agency.
Okay, the reason I ask is because I've worked for the city for 11 years and we've had 10 chiefs of police. So.
Yeah, and that may be, you may find by going through a process like that, that it's emblematic of not having a cohesive policy manual and are people doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. So, you know, going a community like yours that's had such a high turnover of command officers could really benefit from a program like this. We're going to go make sure that your agency is complying with the best standards in the state of Arizona. Any other questions? Yes.
Gentleman in the back, too.
Pushing buttons. I think it's great that you're doing best practices, standard operating procedures, et cetera. That's great. The one thing that's in the back of my mind is the control issue. What safeguards are there that you're not going to be the controlling agency for the city? That we have to have your accreditation or we're going to be in trouble if anything goes wrong.
Okay, well,
It's good that we have it, but if we don't have it, then are we going to be liable for not having it?
no, I don't see any liability for not having it. Again, this is a voluntary process. This is something that the agency CEO, the community CEO, the mayor, the council, this is a decision that they make. This isn't a decision that ACOP makes that we are going to make sure that everyone is accredited. This is still going to be a voluntary process. But once you enter into that voluntary process, you're making a commitment to meet the standards that the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police have set. We're not going to tell you how to meet them. We're just going to give you the standards and tell you that that's what the standards are. So I don't see any liability being attached to not being accredited.
I kind of have two questions. Number one, on your policies that have to be in effect, your policy manual for 3 months. So if a department's undergoing a policy review and transformation, if you will, then it really wouldn't do them any good to apply this first round, correct? I mean, am I correct?
Well, you can still apply, and the reason that I say that is the self-assessment period could last up to 24 months. So you could take the entire 24 months before you tell me that you're ready for an on-site, or if you get it done in 12 months or 18 months, we'll do the on-site then. So in my experience in the state of Michigan, when they started their state accreditation program, one of the problems that they ran into is that they put their standards manual online, publicly available, just like ACOP has, and agencies have pulled off the standards manual and said, we're going to work on this, and when we get our policy manual up to date, then we'll start the process. But the problem is now it's 3 years later and they still haven't started the process yet. The only way to truly do this and be successful, if you talk to any of the CALIA accreditation managers across the state, is put yourself on a timeline and get it done. Once you make that application and you put yourself on a timeline, you will get it done. If you keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, you're never going to get it done.
And my other, I guess more out of curiosity, like you, I'm transplanted here. And I came from a CALIA accredited agency we were accredited for, it seems like forever, but I understand making 174 standards that are mainly for Arizona, but I'm kind of personally curious as to what standards that you deemed that weren't necessary for Arizona when nationally they deemed them necessary, when things that impact us here can be decided in the Ninth Circuit and things like that with other states that aren't just Arizona. And that's more of a curiosity because
Yeah.
I understand the CALIA, we were swamped with, I only thought there was 420, that tells you what I know, but their standards, but it was more on a national level, and I think we all would kind of agree that what happens in Ferguson, who none of us ever heard of, impacts how we do business in Arizona.
Sure.
And I was more curious as to how it was decided, I know I'm long-winded on this question, sorry, how it was decided what standards nationally do not apply to the state of Arizona.
Actually, all of those standards still apply. What the states have done is they've taken the core of CALIA, and that's where the state accreditation programs have focused. This is not necessarily to circumvent CALIA. For those agencies that achieve A-LEAP status, that gives them the opportunity, if they so desire, if they have the staff, if they have the financial wherewithal, to pursue CALIA. We're not saying CALIA is bad by any means. It's just out of reach for the vast majority of the departments across the state, or not just the state, but the nation. This is going for those core ones. And what our policies, I can tell you, our standards match those of Oregon, Rhode Island, Texas, Kentucky. So all of ours, we compare back and forth, and that's where the focus was.
And do you see the accreditation manager job being a part-time? I mean, or once you get into this, I mean, I had 6 people dedicated to accreditation for CALIA.
Yes.
And our department only has 8 right now. And I mean, I like the whole idea of this, I really do. But I'm thinking of staffing as we're talking, and I'm wondering how much time is actually involved for an accreditation manager at this level.
I can tell you that my prior role as the accreditation manager and also our professional standards section, I was the only one. I worked on CALIA and our Michigan accreditation probably half the time. The other half of the time I worked on internal affairs stuff. I worked on supervising our records section. I was the backup detective sergeant. So it did take me about half the time, but what I did was I didn't try to shoulder the whole burden myself. Once our policies were up to date, what I did was I asked our patrol sergeants, hey, you're responsible for these standards, find me proofs of compliance and email them to me. So I didn't try to take on the whole thing myself. I was just kind of like the quarterback, getting all the information and doing something with it. It is way too big of a job unless you have somebody dedicated to that full time to do it all themselves. And it doesn't have to just be a sworn accreditation manager. As a matter of fact, a lot of the agencies in the valley here that are accredited have civilian accreditation managers. So it's not like you're paying, $75,000 or $80,000 for a cop to sit behind a desk to collect proofs of compliance. Utilize your civilian personnel, utilize your records personnel, utilize your volunteers. You know, you could have a volunteer accreditation manager if you wanted to. There's nothing that says that it has to be a sworn employee of your department.
I can tell you from our standpoint, from Kingman, Deputy Chief Kunert is our accreditation manager. It's a part-time assignment to him. However, remember we talked about ownership of this and the buy-in from the top down? We have a full accreditation team in place that's working through all of these standards collectively that involves every supervisor, every command level position within our agency. So while Evan is the ultimate gatherer of everything, everybody inside is working on it. So we don't have the ability, I don't have the ability to assign him full-time to something to that effect. Agencies our size, your size, you wear many hats. So that's what the idea was this.
But let me address something really quick that you talked about CALIA and coming from a CALIA agency, is the comparative standards. If you have CALIA advanced accreditation, there are 44 Arizona standards that CALIA does not have that you would need to comply with. If you are Tier 1 accreditation, which is only 183 standards, there's 106 Arizona standards that you need to comply with. If you don't have that CALIA accreditation, then the entire 174 apply. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I think this is a great program. I'm really happy to see you guys are doing this. You know, POST shows minimum standards, and this gives the agencies an opportunity to show that they are better than minimum standards without having to put all the time and energy and expense into a CALIA certification. Like this gentleman, I worked for a CALIA organization for 30 years, and it takes a lot of time and effort. My question is, if you have an agency that is going for certification, the team comes in and they fall short on 3 or 4 of the categories, what mechanism is in place for them to be able to pick it up and actually meet those goals?
Sure. Well, hopefully prior to the on-site assessment, they will have had a mock assessment that helped identify or pick those things out. But even if they haven't, if there are problems that the on-site assessors find once they get there, they basically call a timeout, call me. If it's something that we can work through while the assessors are on site, we're going to go ahead and do that. We want to give the agencies as much reasonable assistance as possible in order to get accredited. If an agency just tried to phone it in and tried to get their way through the system with as little work as possible, we may have to tell them, no, you're not quite ready yet, and have a discussion with the chief and say, this is what we need you to do before we send our assessors back out there. So it's not like a pass-fail. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that you're successful. And if it takes calling a timeout for 6 months and giving the agency more time, that's what we're going to do. Okay. Any other questions?
No, just a comment that still on this last statement that the chief of Kingman made on the visitation teams, okay? I don't understand law enforcement. I'm not a part of that field, but I've been on visitation teams in the educational field. And I just think that when I, as an elected official, read your final exit report, it would be nice to make sure that I see that there was not just retired and command staff. In other words, police officers looking at police officers. I would like to see somebody from the FBI in there, somebody from the Department of Public Safety in that visitation team, somebody from the DEA. I just don't want you people to be looking at the same group of people with the same lens. Please bring some other law enforcement people from the outside so I can make sure it's a crystal clean audit of what is happening in relation to the standards.
Well, we appreciate that comment, and again, that is something that we will take to our commission meeting on September 11th. So,
I think just in closing, Doug, Mike, former chiefs, now in city administration, I think hopefully you would agree this is probably the the biggest thing that's come into Arizona law enforcement in many, many decades. So we are very excited about it, and we hope your communities will get involved and pursue the ultimate goal as well. But we appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak and introduce the program. So thank you.
Thank you for your participation. Just wanted to quickly remind you that this information is online that you can take and download. And the next meeting is at the Australia Room at 4 o'clock, and that is our business meeting. And then after that, at 6 o'clock, there's the city's showcase in the Grand Ballroom. So have fun. Thank you.